Welcome to Church Without Walls. I'm John, and my tired partner here is Paul. Change. I'm going to talk to you about change today. It came up this week as a criticism, actually, and I've got a lot to be criticized about, but I am not sure change is one of them, but I want to take it as an opportunity to explore how we treat change, both personally in our own lives and in the lives of others. C.S. Lewis's favorite writing, his own favorite writing, was called Till We Have Faces. It's actually my favorite book of his too, and that book is about change. Two sisters. The older sister who didn't manage well after her little sister changed her worldview, and that's what that book is about. It's a fascinating retelling of the myth of Cupid and Psyche, and C.S. Lewis delves deep into how close family members view change, sometimes as even betrayal or neglect or many other negative things. We're going to talk about that today and more on Church Without Walls. Hang with us. Okay, I'm just going to jump right into it because I have a lot to say, and I do have to change something here though. Let's go to this one. Set up left. I think it's that. Yep. All right, folks. Here we go. What started it all? I posted this meme. Did I say it right, Poe? I like to say mem. And since this was the meme idea was, I think, invented by Richard Dawkins. He's English. I'm American. I anglicize it, so mem. I posted this mem earlier this week by Joan Didion from On Keeping a Notebook. And Joan writes, I have already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be. So I never thought this would create a controversy. You know, I posted it to our page at the Sparrows Call because a lot of people that are members over at a Sparrows Call or who follow the page have gone through change. They've deconstructed from their previous selves, their previous worldviews, their religion. They found it a great deal very beneficial, but they've also not found the rose without thorns. There's been a lot of hurt, and this is one of the reasons Wendy and I started the ministry, is kind of walk along with those who maybe have been alienated or hurt within their faith journeys. And I thought this would be a great post to share because I think it's meaningful to reflect on where we were and where we are, where we're going, right? And I thought there's two main benefits of a quote like this, which I find to be rather one that expresses humility in the sense of growth, personal growth. Like, I was wrong 30 years ago. I was naive about certain things. I was ignorant, and that ignorance could have led to hurt for people around me, and I'm grateful to be the person I am today. I'm grateful for those who've helped me get here. I know I still have a ways to go, but I'm grateful for that. I think there were two things that Joan is saying here, and some might find it snarky. I don't think it is, though. She's basically talking about the benefits of keeping a journal. Keeping a journal helps us remember, just like a photo journal, like we look back at photos that maybe we haven't, of events we haven't thought of in years, and we remember. And it brings us back into that time, and we could feel the heat of the picture and even the smells. And we remember what we were doing at the time, the person we were, and maybe even how things have changed. And a journal can do this. A journal can help us keep track of momentous events in our life, and even those slight little changes from year to year that have brought us to where we are. So the importance of journaling, I think, is subtly implicit in her statement here, giving that that's what she's writing about. But she's also writing about the person she was at 18 is different than the person she is now, I'll be generous, at 36, or in my case at 56. And this person, this statement is saying, I'm grateful for the journey that I've taken. I'm grateful I didn't stay back there, because that person, in a way, maybe had many great things going on about her, certainly had at least the curiosity and the courage to venture out of Plato's cave. But that person back there was missing a few things, right? Had some blind spots that may have been corrected along the way, had some naivete, had some ignorance that was carried into life that, looking back now, I could see were harmful not only to people around me, but to my own soul, were damaging to my own soul. It would be kind of like the alcoholic who's been 12 years sober, looking back gratefully that that person is in a better place now, and how different they used to be when the bottle controlled the man, right? That's that kind of a thing. And can you imagine if a friend of yours who's been sober 12 years was talking about that, and you called him a narcissist for saying something like that? I think, I'm not going to completely quote the criticism I got for putting this up, but I think the person read it differently. I think the person read it like this: I've already lost touch with a couple of people I used to know. See, that's talking about other people. That's talking about people we might have, groups, groups, or even worldviews that we've walked away from. That's talking about others, not talking about yourself. And this, I think, is important to keep in mind. Change to people you've left behind is not glorious. It's not beautiful. It's not growth. It's not a blessing. It's threatening. And they take it as something judgmental. They take it as a betrayal. And I think that's the only way you could see this as a narcissistic statement, is if you read it incorrectly and you're taking this statement as a judgment upon those you've left behind. In the past, I've brought up one of the people who truly inspires me in life. He happens to be an African American blues, soul, keyboardist, musician, who's played with everyone from Chubby Checker to, Chuck Berry, and he still plays out on the road today. But he has this unique hobby as a black man of going to Klan rallies. Right? So Daryl Davis is a man who has befriended people who loathe him and hate him, and walked with them in their journey and listened to them and felt their humanity until they break and realize that the man who they're confronted with is not an enemy, is not somebody who's indifferent or who looks at them as loathsome, but as someone who cares enough about them to actually listen to loathsome worldviews, to horrible, naive and ignorant statements, and cares enough about them to sit with them in there until they realize that Daryl's a human being and he's not a caricature of what they've been brought up with. And Daryl has led almost 200 plus people out of racism, out of the Klan. 23 of them, at least last counting, were major figures in the Klan movement, Grand Kleagles and such. And when they come out and they realize Daryl is a better friend and a better loved one than some of their own family members and friends have been, who held to racism, who held to their same worldviews. They've given to Daryl. He may start a museum one day. They've given to Daryl their robes, which they're never going to wear, and now might be symbols of shame to them. Were once symbols of honor to them. So I just want to say this. I've said this to many who don't understand why their families reject them when they deconstruct, or why their church families or old friends treat them differently. There's usually two reactions, and they're poor reactions when somebody goes through deconstruction. It starts out with shaming the individual. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Do you know what you're doing to your mother? You've broken your father's heart. Do you know what people are going to say about you? And when the shaming doesn't work to get the person back in line, to get them back in the cave, Plato's cave, then they shun them. Then it's the cold shoulder. It's the silent treatment. It's the you're dead to me. It's the mental divorce. It's what do you call it when families just, like in a Jewish family, when a devout Jewish family, if a child member has accepted Jesus Christ or something like that, they actually have a funeral for this person, like basically saying you're dead to me. In some extreme circumstances in Islam, they do that, and there might be a literal funeral. And I say extreme circumstances because it'd be wrong to say that about all of Islam. But you get the same idea in evangelical Christianity. They might not go through a ceremony or actually hurt anyone physically, but there's this kind of you're dead to me. You're not my child anymore. And this is really hurtful to people who go through it. And yet I try and point out to them that, as much as we celebrate a former racist coming out of that movement and embracing something that's larger than that and something that's more whole and more loving, they've left a people group behind that doesn't feel that way. They don't celebrate it. They see it as a betrayal. They see it as a judgment on their way of life, which they still embrace. They see you as a traitor, not as somebody who's grown personally and has got greater capacity for love. And this happens in our lives when we change our minds. Sometimes it manifests itself more acutely in politics and religion, but it happens. And it's sad when it does, because it shows that as much as people will talk about unconditional love, they don't love unconditionally. They have conditions, and those conditions revolve around who stays around the fire in Plato's cave, who signals the group that they're loyal members, and who's a Benedict Arnold. So this statement, I have already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be. My son came in the room yesterday, and I was watching an interview with Barack Obama, and I paused it and I said to him, in the past, the person I used to be wouldn't be able to do this, because I had prejudged Barack Obama just based on his political affiliation and some of his background. And I would never be able to listen to him as a fellow human being. I'm being honest about who I used to be. I'd have 1,000 reasons to dismiss him. And the odd thing was, when I was a pastor, kind of a Christian nationalist, and in this movement, a dispensationalist, I used to cringe when people would walk up to me and do that. When I would quote, say, Teresa of Calcutta from the pulpit, or I'd quote a pope or even a friend who happened to be Catholic, I would get a couple people come up to me after church and say, "Don't you know they're not even a Christian?" It was so narrow in our group, because it was a dispensationalist-ish church, that if I would quote somebody who didn't rightly divide, who wasn't a grace believer, I'd get harangued afterwards. There'd be a couple people who bravely would come up to me and try and correct me and say, "Don't you know Charles Spurgeon didn't rightly divide?" I'd quote Spurgeon or C.S. Lewis, "Don't you know?" And that would annoy the heck out of me. And yet I was doing it just on a different level. I would do it more politically. We all do this. We all have this confirmation bias going on. We have to grow out of it. Somebody shares with us a story that may have been printed in the New York Times, and we dismiss it before we even get past the headline, because we all know that the New York Times is a liberal rag and they can't be trusted. That kind of thing, that kind of narrow world with these walls that we've built. That was good. So this is the post that started it all. I want to share another one with you now, how I answered it. Epictetus once said, if somebody criticizes you, two ways to handle it. The first is, if there's truth in the criticism, whether it comes from your mother who loves you or your greatest enemy, right? It doesn't matter who delivers this. If there's truth in it, then you've been given a blessing, right? A mirror has been held up to you where you've previously been blind, and you have an opportunity now to correct yourself and make yourself better. So if somebody criticizes you and there's even a grain of truth in it, be grateful for it. This is high thinking. Some might call it stoic wisdom. It's just human wisdom. This is good human wisdom. You should be able to take constructive criticism, or even destructive criticism if it has truth in it, and make it constructive. That's a superpower. It's a superpower I have to work on all the time, because my first impression is to ball up my fist. But the second thing Epictetus said, if somebody criticizes you and it's just off the wall, it's not you. It's way off. It's not even a caricature of you. It's just not even close. It's just said to hurt you or to humiliate you or demean you. Just laugh it off, because it doesn't stick. It shouldn't stick. You shouldn't waste time. You shouldn't give that person rent in your mind. You shouldn't waste time, thinking about it. And so when I first saw the criticism I got online for posting that, my first reaction to it was to laugh, because I think the person thought I was talking about them and not myself. But I just laughed, and I was able to, because the criticism was just so off the wall, and it had to be based on a misunderstanding. But anyway, this came to my mind. This little another. It's going to be Meme Sunday here. This came to my mind. It's this idea that we're always supposed to remain in the stage of our fellows, that we can never grow. Lewis, in his book on the Four Loves, he talks about friendship, and he talks about those friends who are really acquaintances, and their relationship is based on what they do together. Maybe they're on the same softball team, or they golf together or something, but they really don't have what it takes to be actual friends, to overcome change. And if one person gives up golf, they have nothing else in common, and so their friendship, really their acquaintanceship, kind of dies. Or if one develops a taste, let's say, for classical music, this is the example he uses in his book, and the group or the person that they were friends with just doesn't get it. It just doesn't work for them. They're into hip hop or country, or something that just doesn't have room in it, or interest or curiosity for classical music, and so their relationship dies. That's acquaintanceship. It's not true friendship. And so here at the table, are they going to be able to stay friends? Is the first stage going to be able to have a magnanimous heart large enough to accept that their friend has grown in a different direction and maybe doesn't look like them anymore? Maybe has different capacities than them. Maybe has different desires now. And it takes a large person to have room in your heart for that. Or it takes unconditional love. And this is something I think a lot of Christians talk about, and I think a lot of us fail when it comes down to it. when it comes down to actually loving as Christ would love, when it comes to actually following what Christ told us, his actual teachings, turning the other cheek, carrying the burden, the extra mile, loving not only our neighbors but our enemies, praying not only for our children but for those who persecute us. When this largeness of soul comes into the picture and we're confronted by it across the, in this case, the table, how do we respond? I know how my mother would respond. As I've said in the past, I've seen unconditional love in a handful of people in my life. My mother and luckily my wife, a number of other people. I won't go through the whole list, but it's been a small list, right? It's been a small list where I've actually seen them challenged in a way where are they going to love unconditionally, and they do. Oftentimes it's been with me personally. So this came to mind, and I'm going to share another one with you. This is not one I've shared online, but this is one that came to mind. I have, and this is something you might want to do. Oh, you've just seen it changed. If we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living. This is Gail Sheehy. If we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living. So I have a question for you. For all those who have gone through this, maybe on the wrong end, for all those who've resented somebody who's maybe left their church, or who's maybe grown up, and let's make it a Boston Irish Catholic Democrat family. So this Boston Irish Catholic Democrat family, and you know, if you've grown up there, and you're the one person in the family that votes Republican, it's going to be rough, right? It's going to be rough. Or if you leave Catholicism, it's going to be rough, right? Because it's seen as a complete betrayal, not just a change of heart, but a complete betrayal of the warp and woof that has made up that family, the tradition around it, the meaning of it. Or in other ways, the evangelical Christian family that leans to the right, right? If for some reason this person maybe gravitates towards the Anglican or an Episcopalian church, or leaves the church altogether, or votes Democrat, or you know what, drives a Prius and is a vegan. All these things can be a challenge to those entrenched mindsets. So here's my question to you, especially to those adults in the room. I'm 56. Here's my question to you. Can you think of anything over the past 30, 40 years, since you've been an adult, that you've changed your mind about? Now, I bring this up to you because if you would have asked me this question 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have struggled to think of anything I've changed my mind on. Anything politically, anything religiously or spiritually, anything that was part of, anything that was part of what people call worldview or governing philosophy. It would be hard for me to put my finger on anything. If you ask me that now, it would be hard to get me to shut up. But if you're one of those people like I was 10 years ago, and you haven't changed your mind on anything since the time you were 16, then you have to ask another question. Because that is a common trait coming from the world I came from. Because the world I came from was a world of certainty. We had all the answers. The only question was accumulating that knowledge from within the group. And celebrating it and saluting it and showing our loyalty to it. But we never really questioned it. And those who questioned it were looked upon as troublemakers or those of little faith or so. There were there were gatekeepers to this worldview, and you didn't want to get too close to the electrified fence, or you didn't want to get singled out of the group as somebody who's disloyal, or somebody without honor or without faith, that kind of thing. But it was a world of certainty. I remember books we used to carry in our book ministry at church, 200 answers to hard questions atheists might ask. And I can't even look at books like that now because the answers are so, in some ways, very pathetic and pitiful. But they were enough for those who wanted to live in certainty. They were enough for those. And, no one knew those answers, but they'd have to buy the book if they had a Jehovah's Witness friend or something. Or they'd call me up. Hey, the Mormon missionaries are coming over in a half hour. What do I say to give me the cheat sheet, give me the cliff notes, that kind of thing. If you live in a world of certainty, then your whole life it revolves around finding the certain answers, and they're not your own. And as a young person, that intrinsic, inquisitive nature of a child, which, by the way, Jesus loved, and Jesus said, be like a child in this way, that was stomped out in that world. That was bad behavior. But if you had that inquisitive nature, if you were curious, if you had a scientific mindset where the scientific method said, but what if I'm wrong? Or the scientific method says, if this is true, then it can handle scrutiny. That can handle these hard questions. What about this? And our kids would ask us these questions. And it was extremely uncomfortable. Not in my family personally, because my family kind of, even my father and my mother encouraged, critical thinking. So that was kind of like the portions of the Declaration of Independence that would one day bring down slavery. Might not initially bring it down, but would lead to it. So if you come from a family like that, though, it was quashed. That was seen as bad behavior, but it was very uncomfortable if you're driving home from Sunday school and your 7 or 8 or 9-year-old child asked you a question that was outside the bounds of comfort in your prescribed worldview or faith. So I have to ask you something. If you're this person, if you're listening to the show right now, and you can't point to anything of substance that you've changed your mind about, that you've grown out of in the last 30 or 40 years, then it's time after this show to pray about it. Ask God if that is a reasonable place to be. After all, we aren't infallible. Even in that world of certainty I left, we're told God's infallible, God's inerrant, right? Sometimes we're told the Bible is that, but that's blasphemy. God is the only one who's infallible and inerrant. And do we have the mind of God? Are we really saying that? I know the Bible says we have the mind of Christ, but that's not saying that we're perfect or we have all the answers, because if Christians have all the answers, they certainly aren't agreed upon what they are. So that's the question. What can you name one thing or two things or three big things that you've changed your mind about over the years, that you've grown out of your past ignorance? Maybe it's your view of the LGBTQ community. Maybe you have a different mindset on climate science and climate change. Maybe you've grown out of a particular worldview. Listen, we've seen this happen even in the world of certainty and evangelicalism. Minds have changed about smoking cigarettes. Minds have changed about playing cards or dancing or attending the theater. Minds have changed about certain modes of dress. Minds have changed about interracial marriage. Minds have changed about divorce. So even in a state of no change, there is change over a period of time. And you don't think exactly like your parents did or your grandparents did about everything, do you? What I did share online was this next meme. I'll say it so Peyton doesn't roll her eyes. Oh, actually, it wasn't this one. But I'll share this one too. Unless you change in a negative way, not being the same person is not a bad thing. We all change from year to year. Situations change us. Age changes us. Life changes us. If you're not changing, you're not living. So this is the important distinction between just change and growth. Change is neutral. It could be good or bad. People change for the worse, right? This is why change, when it becomes a political slogan. One thing I disagree about President Obama about was his hope and change argument. Hope, yes. Change, change is neutral. And I think he meant to say growth. I think he used change in the positive sense. I'll give him that. Change in a positive way, growth. I know that's what he meant, so I can tip my hat to that. But change in itself is neutral. People change for the worse over time. And there's a number of expressions of that. I don't have to express that to you because you've met people who've changed for the worse over time, right? But it's usually not becoming more open to others. It's usually becoming more narrow and more stilted in your beliefs and more closed to people when change becomes a negative thing, right? But this is the one I shared because it's from Muhammad Ali. And he says this, and I love that he's sitting with his daughter in this picture. I'm not sure he said this when he was sitting with his daughter, but the man who views the world at 50, the same as he did at 20, has wasted 30 years of his life. Now, I share this quote to you because I'm 56 now. When I was 50, I had already begun to change. But when I was 40, if he would have said, the man who views the world at 40, if he would have said the man who views the world at 40 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 20 years of his life, I was that man. There was little change between John Kirkwood at 20 and John Kirkwood at 40. Very slight change, very little change. And I could look back now and say there was very little growth. Beyond what I learned by rote, what I accepted from others at a young age, 14, 12, 16. My growth through those years was simply in understanding the worldview that was handed to me. Embracing the nuances, being able to teach those nuances, being able to share those nuances. And I believed them. I believed they were the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Until I got to an age noticing inconsistencies along the way and dismissing them because it was uncomfortable. Until I got to the age where I said, why am I ignoring these things if I truly am a man of honor? If I truly am allegiant to truth, to the God who is truth, do I honor God by not really seeking out the truth with my whole body, my whole mind, my whole self? Is my truth, the truth that I believed, the truth that I celebrated and endorsed, is that truth so fragile that it can't stand up to scrutiny? It was at that point when I became curious enough and honest enough to say, what if I'm wrong? And to explore and to actually listen to negative voices from within and without the church. And I actually went into it kind of enamored with a challenge because I was going to be better prepared to answer those naysayers by delving into the study. I wasn't scared going into it. I was open. I was like Achilles when he's fighting Hector outside of the walls of Troy. And you remember in the movie, the Brad Pitt movie, when Hector trips over a stone, Achilles could have killed him easily, but he didn't want that ending. He wanted to kill the best opponent at his best and not accept, this consequence for an easy victory. So he allowed Hector to stand back up, and he said, I'm not going to allow a stone to steal my glory. I went into this examination of my beliefs like Achilles approached Hector. I said, stand up, young prince. I want your best. And in some cases, things I'd held for years didn't stand up to the scrutiny. They were fragile houses of cards that blew away with the first wind. And yet there are some things that I believe to this day that were reinforced, that lasted through the storm. So I don't have a lot left, Poe. Are we almost ready to go to you? So I just want to say to you, I want to encourage you, if you're on the wrong side of this issue and you haven't changed in 30 years, you know, the unexamined life is not worth living, says the great philosopher. Have you examined your life? Not just decisions you've made, but why you've made them. I encourage you to do so. Even at a late stage in life, there's always room to grow. You'll be better for it. But also, this should make us more empathetic to those who are different than us or who have walked away from what we believe. We should be more open to listen to them, not to respond, but to listen to understand. We should be more open to love them for who they are, with unconditional love. This is what brings glory to the Christ. This is what makes people marvel over how we act in certain circumstances and say that's almost not human. You know, the same reaction that Jesus Christ got from those around him under extreme circumstances. If you want to live a Christ-filled life, then you have to recognize that when Christ was living his life, he wasn't embracing and defending the status quo. He was a challenge to it. He was the one who people around him would call a narcissist or would say, you're out of line. You're arguing with Moses. You're arguing with Abraham. You're arguing with our precious book. And who are you to do that? So listen, to those of you listening who have gone through this with family, who have left churches, and you're isolated and you're alienated and you're feeling more harm than blessing, then know you're in good company. Every time somebody has challenged the status quo with the truth, unfortunately, they go through this. They're attacked. They're belittled in their time. Maybe years later, they're embraced. Martin Luther King Jr. is embraced now. He wasn't during his time. All kinds of horrible things were said about him. Jesus Christ wasn't embraced. Nelson Mandela spent 3 decades in prison. We celebrate him now. And you might never be celebrated, but you can live fully in your time and express to your loved ones and the next generation that it's never too late to change. That allow truth to whittle away the dead branches in your life, to prune the tree so there's room for greater growth. Have the humility for that. Also have the humility to embrace others who think different than you. I'm going to leave you with that. What else, Poe?
Give me a second.
Give you a second. Okay, let me change something here to be that one. We can't really see what you're doing, though, from that shot. For some reason, your camera's out of... Anyway, Peyton, if you're new to Church Without Walls, we're a place where you could just pull up next to your computer screen or watch on YouTube later and have a cup of coffee and a bagel, which I had today before we came on. I'd have it with you, but my wife says it's really annoying when I eat on camera. So I'm there in spirit. I have to drink because I get parched. But I don't eat on camera. But feel free to just pull up a chair coffee, bagel, and if you're not in church on Sunday morning, let this be your church without walls. Let this be a place where you can still have some spiritual nourishment. I often give you questions to ask more than answers. I'm not the Bible answer man. That makes me cringe. And I'm not even the Bible question man because I don't think our spiritual life should revolve around something finite and fallible, even as precious as our religious texts. I think God is bigger than the binding of a Bible. Oh, oh, you ready? All right. So, which angle you want to show this camera? You want me to show it and you to talk about it? There we go. All right, Paul. What do we want to know about this? You don't know? What is it?
A porch.
It's a porch. What's on the porch? A stool?